Hello everybody, so today we're going to be talking about uni, specifically how you can do well in your exams and by extension in your subjects. So there's a bit to unpack here, and structuring this video has been a little bit difficult, so it might just be a collection of tips and then I'll like count how many tips there were once I've made the video and be like top 7 things to do well in uni, and it'll be like BuzzFeed. I think that's a good idea. I like this. So before we get into it, I kind of just want to talk about what I'm studying and just a little bit about like my background so that you guys understand where I'm coming from. So I'm studying software engineering and finance at Monash University, which is one of Australia's top unis. Honestly, I kind of just go there because it's like 20 minutes from my house, but it's like 55th in the world or something like that. So if you're going to like Harvard and you're like, listen to this guy, he doesn't know what he's talking about because he doesn't go to Harvard like me, then yeah, you're probably right. Just take this advice with a grain of salt, all right? Anyway, software engineering and finance. The software engineering side, I basically got into that because I did general engineering to start with, thought I was going to do chemical engineering, and then realized I actually really liked doing software. And then in terms of finance, started just general commerce and then majored in finance because it's the most quantitative major, or one of the most quantitative majors. I've been really getting into like the statistics side of things, so that's been pretty fun. I've done a bit of marketing and law and like other sort of more squishy, I suppose, subjects, but I've generally focused on the STEM side of things, so I guess keep that in mind as well. Anyway, I'd say the first and most important thing, and this is going to be like a low blow to some of you, I guess, is like to actually like what you're studying, and if you do that, everything else sort of falls into place. Not 100%, but it helps a lot. Personally, I found like I've done a couple of law units, and law is kind of just not my jam. Like I just feel like it's not how my brain works. It's not my favorite thing to study. I really have to force myself to just like run through legal texts, and so I find that I struggle with those subjects a bit more. On the other hand, something like operating systems I've really liked, and diving into those internals of like how the software and the hardware connect together and all of that, I found really enjoyable. So that was a unit that I did well in. So you sort of find this would be true for anything, right? If you enjoy it, then you're probably going to do better in it. So that's probably just the first like sanity check that you should make sure that you actually like at least somewhat like what you're doing. Don't get me wrong, sometimes even if I generally like the subject, or I generally like the broad subject, and I'm studying something that's specifically not that interesting, like I don't know, like networking cables, then and you just go through it. But you should sort of wake up each morning and go, I'm like happy to be studying this thing. I feel like it's helping me in some way, and I feel like I actually enjoy the content. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing, which flows on from that pretty much directly, is don't study just to get an exam mark or a subject mark. Study because you want to learn the content, right? And uni and school, I suppose in general, has this sort of perverse incentive of it's grading you on like how well you did in tests and exams, but it doesn't really care about what you actually know. So you can only, even if you get really into a subject and you start studying all these things periphery to it to broaden your knowledge base, and then they don't ask any questions about those on the exam, you are not going to do any better on the exam, right? So you're not really rewarded for that. But I really stress it's important to think of like learning and acquiring knowledge, and then being able to use that knowledge for various purposes as sort of a reward in itself. And that way, when you're sitting down and you're studying and do a 4-hour, 5-hour, 8-hour, whatever, I don't know what you guys do, like study sesh, and you just want to sit down and learn something, you're actually going to enjoy it because you realize I'm learning this because I want to learn this, not just I'm learning this so that I don't fail this unit. And I found, once again, the things that I actually found interesting to learn are the ones that I did much better on. Flowing on from that, I think the times that I have felt most motivated to study is when I was sort of going above and beyond with something. So take an example, last semester I took a course in like introductory corporate finance. To some of you, that's probably the most boring and dry course ever. I personally really liked it, but basically the content from the lectures and from the tutorials and so on was so-so. It was moderately interesting, but it didn't go all that deep into the underlying concepts, and I found those concepts quite interesting. So I decided I was going to go and on YouTube basically try and find as much content as I could about this subject, try and find other textbooks on it and so on. So on YouTube I stumbled across on Khan Academy, they've got this whole series on finance taught by Sal Khan himself. Like, what can't this man do? He does maths and biology and chemistry and everything, but he happened to know a lot about finance, and he previously worked at a hedge fund. He was sort of talking about the global financial crisis and all of the things that led up to that and the mathematics behind it, and all of this really interesting content that wasn't like directly related to what I was studying at uni, but it gave this broader context to it. And so I felt like I had a really strong base. When I got asked a question in an exam or in a test from that subject, I felt like I could sort of answer it knowing why, not just how or what. I also sort of had this broader understanding of the underlying economy, I suppose. And don't get me wrong, you know, I was not an expert or anything like that, but I felt like I had gone a lot further than I needed to, but because of that, it actually helped a lot. And you know, the difference there might add 5 or 10% to your final score, just in terms of like having that underlying context that you can, you know, you'll at least know if you're answering something wrong, basically, because you go, hang on, this doesn't really line up with everything else I know. So that's one example, and I found that to be particularly true for computer science, software engineering, because there's so many technologies that they don't really have time to teach you, like the actual tech that you might use in industry, like, I don't know, Docker and Git and all of that stuff. So they just teach you the fundamentals, but then they kind of expect that you go off and learn it a little bit yourself. I find going above and beyond with that and like understanding like Git internals and different programming languages that they haven't even mentioned, I find that is a really good way to get confident and get to the point where you can, you know, help other people on group projects and so on, and really sort of become that person who knows what they're talking about. And you don't necessarily get that from uni. So am I saying that uni is useless? Not at all, because it does teach fundamentals that are really difficult to sort of understand and learn on your own. So for example, with computer science, if you want to learn about like concurrency and parallelism, we've got like a course on that where you learn about mutexes and semaphores and all of this crazy stuff, which you pretty much wouldn't learn if you're a self-taught developer unless you're working on parallel code. So there's like a lot of computer science fundamentals that are really important, and you won't pick them up otherwise. So I think uni has its place, but its place is really well complemented with, you know, a bit of industry experience if you can get it. If not, then just do side projects, learn as much as you can. And that is personally how I have found to do well. Like people say to me, because I've been working, you know, 2 days a week through uni, basically in a tech team as a software developer, and people say, do you find like it's difficult to find time to study and so on? And personally, I think I would be doing worse if I wasn't, just because even though I'd have the extra time, I would really have to put in effort to direct that time well. So directing it towards things that are sort of external to what you're studying, but giving you experience in that area is a good way to actually improve your scores. All right, so time for the next tip. The next tip is to set pretty ambitious goals at the start of each semester and try in earnest to work towards those goals. Sometimes things don't go to plan, but it's important to have a plan. And what I have found in my experience is that just the act of setting and having those goals really sets my sights and my focuses towards achievement. And if I hadn't have had those goals, I wouldn't do as well. Even when I do have those goals, I might not hit them, but that's not the point. The point of having the goals is that you're kind of striving towards them. And so those goals can be quite ambitious. They might be, you know, I want to get 95 in this unit. And it ends up being that, you know, maybe I end up getting like somewhere in the 80s for that unit. That maybe that 95 was not that achievable, but just the fact that I was actually trying to go towards it sort of pushes things in the right direction. And I find personally, I'd say above about the 85 to 90 level, I don't really know anyone who's got like an average mark that's higher than about 92, something like that, just because I think there's a lot of variability in the courses that you do and the units that you take and how they're assessed. And there is just, I think it's very difficult to get to that point where you're making no mistakes. It's almost improbable. I don't want to say impossible, but it's very difficult at university compared to, say, you know, in high school, where if you get, you know, 70 or 80 or 90 on a test, it's because you actually got a fair bit of stuff wrong. Whereas with uni, it's often sometimes there'll be subjective marks, and it'll be like, to get 100% on that, it would have to be like earth-shatteringly good. So yeah, in my experience, you know, you're aiming for a high score, but you might not always get there. That's fine. It's really about trying to best yourself and trying to improve on what you did last time. And I think that's something that I've sort of managed to do well throughout uni. I think my mark is like slowly improved as I got through uni, even as the courses have sort of got harder. So another story coming back to this idea about, you know, going above and beyond. This is from a friend of mine. He's also studying software engineering at Monash, and he took this unit in iOS app development, and they had this final project that was worth a fair bit, where you had to build an app of your own design, and they expected around 15 to 20 hours of work for it. And he put in something like, you know, 40, 50, 60 hours building a clone of meetup.com. It was sort of a clone with his own features. It was like more about informal groups and things if you've used Meetup. But basically he built this app and like learned pretty much everything there is to learn about designing like table views and all of these like different things that you're using for that app. And he built this backend which wasn't part of the project. He said, you know, that was a really fun time, and he learned heaps from that. And he feels like, you know, he's quite capable at building iOS apps now. And then obviously, you know, that was reflected in how well that project got marked, which, you know, got really good marks for. All right, now time for a more technical tip that's just pretty universally applicable, I'd say. I can't go without this, but basically, if you are watching lectures in person, unless you have a really good reason to do it, probably not worth it. If you're watching them online and you're watching them at like normal one-time speed, again, probably don't do it. Just get an extension that's called Video Speed Controller for Chrome. I'm sure there's equivalents for Firefox and so on. And basically what it does is allows you to just change the speed of the videos you're watching. And I'll generally watch my lectures at 1.7 or something like that time speed initially when I'm first going through it, and then the second run through, there's another important thing you do. So before the actual exam, what you want to do like a couple of days before is pretty much rerun all the lectures, and I'll do that at about 2 times speed or maybe even more, and that allows you to just pick up on anything that you sort of slip through the cracks as you were studying for the unit, or that wasn't maybe that important at the time, and then you think, okay, maybe this can come up on the exam. So I found that really helpful for especially like memorization based subjects. So when I was studying finance law, that was really useful strategy. Also when I was studying computer networks, for some reason our computer networks course was focused just on like memorizing a whole bunch of stuff, which I don't think was a great way to teach it, but nevertheless, you just got to adapt to the program. I found like at the very end of the unit, it took only really maybe 7 or 8 hours just to go through all the lectures again, pretty much double speed them. If there's stuff that was just super obvious, I'd skip it and just take notes on the things that I had missed. And that probably saved me, like, picked up another 5% on the unit mark, to be completely honest. That was just things I would have missed because I didn't think they were important. And then they came up on the exam, and because I had studied them like a day or two prior, then I was aware. So that's something that's really useful. Another thing that I found like super important, that I don't know that many people who do this, but I found it really, really important, is just completely eliminating distractions. How many people do you know who go to the library and they'll study and they'll basically be like on their phone while they're studying, or they'll be like watching videos on the computer that are unrelated, and then they'll like flip between tabs and so on. Like, we live pretty much in an epidemic of multitasking, right? I found that the best way to stop that is just to not let myself do it by like actually blocking it. And you might think maybe that's like weak self-control or something like that, but I mean, does self-control work in that case? I prefer the Mac app, Self-Control, which basically prevents you from, you can pretty much add a block list of websites, block those at like the host level on your computer, and you cannot access them. So I like block Facebook, Reddit, didn't block YouTube because actually finding it useful for studying in certain things. Maybe that was like where I spent a bit of time where I didn't need to, but I found that was immensely useful. And then on my phone, so I have an Android phone, and Android lets you customize these things a bit. So an app from the Play Store called Lock Me Out, which does a similar thing, except you set like a time schedule. And so I set basically from 9 to 5, I'd be studying, and that will block me out of like any like messaging apps, any social media apps, things like that. In terms of having social media apps on your phone, I think that's another really important thing. Don't. I have Snapchat, admittedly. I am 22 years old, like this is our generation, but Instagram, I don't use. Facebook, I use very occasionally, and when I do use it, I'll use it through the web interface. I basically don't have the app on my phone, just because I find these companies, you become aware of this, I suppose, when you do software engineering. They have spent so much money trying to make a product that is as addictive as possible, and I decide that the easiest way to avoid that is just to not let myself be in that situation. So it's equivalent to sort of, if you find that you eat too much junk food, then you just don't keep junk food in the house, right? So I just don't keep the apps on my phone, and at the same time, I'll like, when I'm in a period where I want to really just focus down and study and do nothing else but study, then I will actually actively use like Lock Me Out, Self-Control, that sort of thing. And I found it really good. There's another one called Pluck Eye, which is for Mac and for Windows, and that's an interesting one because it like blocks everything by default, and then you can slowly like add things as like a whitelist. So a bit of a different strategy, might work for you, so give it a try. But yeah, I mean, if you want to get things done and you want to be serious about not getting distracted, you got to be serious about it, and you got to say to yourself, well, I'm not actually going anywhere near anything that's distracting, and that's how you actually get things done. So that's another idea that worked well for me. Similar to that, I think cramming is this software engineering in me is like anti-pattern. That's the word you need to use here. Cramming is an anti-pattern. What do I mean by that? Well, just don't do it. It's bad. It produces undesirable outcomes. Basically, cramming, meaning, you're studying up to the very, very, very last minute, and often that'll mean going without sleep. Well, first of all, just don't go without sleep. It's like, don't put yourself in that position, basically, is my advice there. But if you do find yourself studying up to the last minute, think about like, why is that? Are you anxious about the exam? Are you anxious that you haven't covered the content yet? And then you got to adapt that for the next time that you're taking the exam, right? So what I've tried to do, and been generally reasonably successful with this, is about an hour from my exam, I force myself to stop studying. And I know this well in advance, like 2 days, 3 days in advance. I know that I'm not going to let myself study between, you know, an hour before the exam and the actual exam. And that gives me this opportunity and almost forces me to just sort of step back, relax, realize that I've studied as much as I need to, as much as I'm going to, and as much as I can. And then I can just go for a walk, listen to some music, relax for a bit, chill out, and then I won't be so stressed when the actual exam happens. And that's something I applied when I was in high school and I had like final exams for end of year 12. It's something that I've applied throughout uni, and it's something that has worked really well. So that's another good strategy. A similar strategy to sort of help prevent burnout is sometimes it is worth just taking a break. I found that especially true when I had a big gap between exams. So my exam sort of period this year was, I had one exam and then I had about 5 days, and then I had 2 more exams, and then I had 9 days until my final exam. So I had this 9-day period, and what was I going to do in that period? Like a bit of work, sleep, eat, study. It seemed to me that that wasn't really going to be an enjoyable 9 days at all. So pretty much, you know, I had a couple of days of work. So if we take those 2 out, then that was 7 days left. And I decided, you know, I don't need 7 days to study for this unit. I'm going to give myself, you know, 3 days, 4 days, maybe 5 days if I need it. And so I took 2 days out and went, I'm going to go do an overnight camping trip with my girlfriend, and we are just going to forget about studying for that whole day. And do I regret doing that? Not at all. I think that's a very valid thing that you can do in those situations, especially when you've got that bit of extra time. Even if I had have only had 5 days between, could have been useful for just, maybe not for an overnight trip, but you know, just spend an hour, drive out an hour and go look at a mountain or something, you know, just get back into nature and take a break, stop thinking about studying, and just avoid that burnout. So that means, well, 2 things. Number one, it means that you actually get more done because you recharge, you regenerate, and you can go back and you can study more. And number 2, you just enjoy your life more. So there's pretty much nothing to lose there. Something that I would recommend. And something that maybe I need to apply myself more. That was the only time I did that. I really would have been happy to do that like before other exams as well, because I did have quite a bit of time between all the different exams. So yeah, it's advice for myself as much as it is for you guys. All right, now final tip is to find synergies between the things you're studying. And this is generally achievable if you're studying sort of a degree that is concentrated around particular topics that are somewhat related. And so I found that with like software engineering, there's lots of different parts of software engineering that are linked together. So for example, when I was studying computer architecture and I was studying discrete maths, then we started talking about logic, and like the logic circuits were very similar to the logic we were talking about in discrete maths, obviously because they're logical. And so that was like really good synergy, and it meant that, you know, rather than being 2 units, it was like 1.5 units because there was so much overlap between the content. I had the same thing last semester. So when I was studying econometrics, which is basically applying statistical methods to data, and then I was also studying corporate finance. And one of the topics in corporate finance was measuring risk and quantifying it. And there's this idea that, you know, when you diversify a portfolio, you reduce the risk, and there's mathematical underpinnings behind that, which we studied in both units. And because I studied it in both units, even though it's like somewhat complex, it's not like a particularly difficult idea, but once you understand it once, then just you understand it for both of those. So doing those 2 units at the same time was a really good idea because it meant, you know, reduce the workload a bit. There was that really good synergy between the 2. And then there's also synergies between things that you're doing outside of uni and the things that you're doing inside of uni. So for example, I took part in this competition called AI Arena, where we had to build basically a computer bot to play a game that consisted of, it was kind of like Pac-Man, you want to get points and avoid the enemy. And so basically we used like this net present value, which is like a finance concept based like discounting model to calculate what was the expected return on each step that it makes and so on. So we like applied all these financial methods to solving this computer science problem, and it worked really well. It's a really other interesting synergy that I think gave us sort of a distinct advantage, being like 3 people on the team and 2 of us were doing finance versus some of the other teams where everyone was just doing computer science. We had this like extra body of knowledge that we could sort of tap into that was actually really useful for the problem at hand. So yeah, if you can find synergies between the things you're studying or things that you're studying and other things that you know or that you're doing or that you whatever, then I mean, take advantage of those. It's the best way to sort of reduce your workload really, but at the same time you get to study something twice, so it goes in even a bit deeper, and you maybe see it from multiple different perspectives as well. All right, I lied. This wasn't the final thing. There's one more final thing. It's so obvious, but for some reason no one does it, which is if you get given practice exams or practice like study materials for like a mid-semester test or anything like that, just do all of them. If they give you 10, just do all 10. If you don't have time, or you think it's a waste of time, or you're getting to the point where you've like done 5 and you're getting like 95% on them, then okay, maybe don't do all of them. But like the number of people I know who have gone, oh, I didn't do well in that unit. It's like, oh, did you do the practice test? Oh, I did like half of one. So it's like, okay, well, that's an easy solution, right? Low-hanging fruit here. Anyway, I thought I'd just point it out just in case it's something that people have missed. But I'd say that's, yeah, pretty important. All right, so hopefully that wasn't too long a video. I'm sitting here, it's been like half an hour since I started talking, but I'm gonna like chop this thing down. Hopefully this has been like useful. Hopefully you've learned something or a thing or two. I think I'm gonna learn a thing or two going back through this video going, oh yeah, I did that. Coming next semester, when I have my exams for next semester, I'm gonna try and like stick to this advice as much as possible, and I'll let you know how that goes. But yeah, I'd say like these are probably the main tips that I've relied on. Some of them are things that I've picked up just throughout doing uni. Some of them are things I learned from other people. But on the whole, I'd say like every one of these tips has served me really well, and I hope they serve you well too. So good luck with them, and good luck with your uni exams.